It's some 29 minutes after 7. Welcome to AM Talk. And today we're discussing an issue that should concern all of us. I want you to look at some statistics that we're going to show you in a bit. The richest man in Ghana now earns more in a month than one of the poorest women could earn in 1,000 years. The report titled Building a More Equal Ghana, a 5-point action plan to close the gap between the rich and the rest, found, among other things, that the rich were capturing a greater share of benefits of growth in our country. The report suggests that the rich in Ghana earn in a month what the poor will earn in 1,000 years. It also revealed that Ghana's a measure of inequality grew by 3.3% points between 1992 and 2013. The bottom 60% of Ghanaians had a 35% share of total national income in 1988, but this declined to 30% in 2012. Meanwhile, 1,000 more dollar millionaires were created between 2006 and 2016, according to the report. These are statistics that should scare all of us, and that's why on the back of that we want to have a conversation. My guest in the studio is part of the organizations that put up this, and it was a combination of Oxfam, Send Ghana, and the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. My guest is Sulemana. He's Inequality Programs and Campaigns Manager with Oxfam. Good morning. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I want us to box it with this story in the Daily Dispatch newspaper of today on page 2. 8.2% of Ghanaians are extremely poor, and that's according to a Ghana Statistical Service survey. It's the Ghana Living Standard Survey, round 7, on Ghana's poverty profile, and it's on trends of poverty and inequality. It's revealed that based on 2017 population projections, a total of 6.8 million people were captured as poor and therefore could not afford to spend 4.82 Ghana cedis per day in 2016-2017, and this is also very much detailed in the paper. But really, Zach, this is not the first time that we're having to have this conversation. We've always been talking about the gap widening, and it looks like it's even widening further. What's accounting for this?
Thank you very much. I think there are many reasons that is accounting for the widening inequality gap between the rich and the rest, as we have put it in the report. First and foremost, we have poor financial management, which is driving the inequality gap between the rich and the poor. And this is seen in many factors. You will recall that 10 years ago, we were forgiving our debts, but we are back into the
debt. That's epic.
Yes. We are back into the debt crisis. And as a result of that, government is having to pay as much as 42% of national total revenue in servicing debt in 2017 alone. When that happens, government is denied the resources that are required to invest in inequality reducing sectors such as health, education, and social protection. If we are able to provide more access to quality health and quality education free for the poor, what we are doing is that we are going to save them the monies that they would have otherwise used to procure these services. And that will inevitably increase their incomes. The second reason is that we are not doing too well in raising taxes or tax revenues progressively. And the emphasis here is progressive taxation. We are not succeeding in having a tax regime where we are able to collect more from the rich and redistribute it to the poor. And again, there are many reasons that account for this. There are administrative bottlenecks in the tax collection machinery. Our economy is largely informal and cash-based, so it is very difficult to track. And then we also have a large amount of what we call tax incentives and tax exemptions, some of which could be taken away in order to help us meet our tax revenue targets on an annual basis. So that explains in brief the poor financial management.
Okay.
But there are other factors. We are unable to make public services available and affordable, especially for the poor. Women are continuously discriminated against in public policy making. And then work and wages do not seem to be helping people to raise their incomes. And last but not the least, and perhaps the most important reason, is elite political capture. Just a few people are dominating our decision-making processes, and the net effect is that they make policies that serve their interests rather than the interests of the majority of the people in Ghana.
How do we make sense out of that, the last point that you made, considering the many people actually vote for these few?
Yes, the political elite and of course economic elite are the ones who dominate policy making, and the political elite are voted into office by the majority of our people.
Yeah.
But what is lacking is that once they get voted into office, accountability between us and them is weak. They make policies without reference to our interests or the interests of the poor. There are no systematic consultations between citizens and their elected representatives. And there is also no continuous feedback between our elected representatives and the citizens in a way that enables the citizens to ask questions, but also to put their viewpoints and interests across.
Yeah.
And so it gives space to the few elites to churn out policies that turn out not to be addressing the needs of the larger majority of our population.
Okay, it's good you made that point, because I was thinking we've had a lot of interventions.
Yes.
There's so many interventions, particularly directed at the poor.
Yeah.
But if the figures are even worsening further, then what that means really is that all the interventions are not working. So what have we been doing?
Yes, and I think that is the essence of this report. The report essentially is trying to say that we have an economic system that is not working in the interest of the majority of the people.
Please explain the economic system.
I will explain that by giving you a few examples.
Okay.
Ghana's economic development model tend to invest much more in certain sectors than others. For example, our road infrastructure and other infrastructure that enable production is geared towards the production of cash crops and minerals, to the detriment of, for instance, cash crop production, where you find the majority of our people. Agric is set to employ the majority of our people, and Agric is bedeviled with a lot of challenges: high input costs, poor infrastructure, limited market access, and low prices for agric produce, especially crops. And then all the challenges that you can see along the agri value chain process. So we will need to shift away and begin to balance our policies in such a way that it distributes some of these infrastructure and other investments fairly, such that the majority of the people will be enabled to. The other point is that, as I said earlier, education, health, and social protection helps to put virtual capital in the pockets of the poor and the poorest. It also helps the poor to be able to move up economically, socially, and politically. But what we see, and I mean, news reports are awash with deprivation you see in most rural areas, where pregnant women have to walk long distances to access health facilities. In many cases, they get to the health facilities and they are attended to by ill-trained people. Sometimes they have to pay for this service, which is not of quality.
There's a viral video of a woman who had to cross a river, you know, ended up losing her life, sadly, and her child as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we've had our own reporters bringing us stories of places where they have to drink contaminated. I mean, this is water that you would not even use to wash anything of yours, and human beings are drinking.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, these examples are cut across, and you can also see that in the area of education. But in discussing all of this, there are rural urban dimensions to it. There are gender dimensions to it. And as I earlier on alluded to, there are also income dimensions to it. So you will find, for instance, that a larger percentage of people completing junior high school in northern Ghana, in Accra, who are boys, attain the basics of mathematics. Compared to just about 20% of girls in rural Savannah who also attain the same level of learning in mathematics. And so the examples continue.
Yeah. In your report, for instance, you say very poor children in the north, for instance, have never been to school.
Yes.
How do they get out of the situation then? Because if those at the top are not making things accessible, one of the surest ways that families can get themselves out of poverty, at least those coming after them, will be through education.
Yeah, so in the recommendations of the report, it states that one of the ways we can reduce inequality is to ensure that we invest sufficiently in providing public services, and that includes education.
Okay, so can you just pause? Let me ask something. So we say that school at the basic level is free.
Yes.
So how come these children are not in school?
There are many reasons. For some of them, they just don't have access to school within a walking distance.
So there's no infrastructure,
there is no school within a walking distance. And we are in communities in northern Ghana where we are helping to establish such schools. You might have heard about the wing schools that we did in Gushegu, Karaga, Saboba, East Gonja. And we have done so in more than 100 communities that could not just access school. It was just impossible for children in those communities.
So, but for the intervention of civil society, for instance, in these communities, there wouldn't have been
school for these children. But even in those communities where there are schools, we are having to face privatization of schooling through what is called the low-fee private schools. And this is marketed at the poor. Those who are able to afford it still have to pay a larger proportion of the family income on every child that goes to school. This report estimates that it takes as much as 40% of family income to send one child to those low-fee private schools.
That's huge, and that would make incredible impact.
Those families have to make a choice. If they have many children, they'll have to make a choice to send one or two or just a few. Not all of them can attend. There is another group that attends public school provided by government. And in many areas of rural Ghana, these schools are also understaffed and under-resourced. And so they are faced with situations where learning outcomes are very low, and they cannot compete with their colleagues in cities like Accra, Kumasi, and elsewhere. But the other category of schooling is for the top elite. They go to the elite schools, such as the Morning Stars, if I can mention them, and it is the few elite who can afford it. And that is helping, that is stratifying our society. What it means is that if private schooling in the elite schools provide good quality learning outcomes, the chances are that children who pass through that will get better education than those who will attend the free public schools that are ill-resourced. And that is why we are calling for greater investment into...
Is that all we can do, really? Because we've been talking for a very long time.
Yes.
How else do we shake the decision makers? Tell them that, listen, pause. All the interventions you're making is getting us nowhere. Let's collapse everything. Let's begin. Let's have a more strategic way that would make a positive impact, really.
Yeah. Actually, besides calling for increased investment into these sectors, public policy makers have to make it possible for citizens to actually take part in the decision-making process, and more importantly, to ask for accountability.
We have representatives in Parliament.
Well, they are far away from the areas where the need is. And
Isn't that interesting? Because our parliamentarians are supposed to be coming from within the constituencies. They live with us.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look like it's translating into what the messages that they are sending across.
Yes. Parliamentarians can do as much as they can, but it takes all of us to be part of the process to ensure accountability at all levels.
How do we do it, apart from going every 4 years? Because for some people, that's the only option they have, is to either vote for a change or vote for you to stay.
Let me give you an example with education. A headmaster can preside over a school that gets 0% in JHS for 10 years, and nothing happens. We are looking for a situation where citizens in those communities, parents whose children attend those schools, are empowered, and they have the opportunity to understand what learning outcomes are and to engage with the heads of schools, district education authorities, to account for the quality of learning outcomes. And where teachers and heads of schools are non-performing, they will have to answer for their non-performance or be sanctioned if they continue not to perform well. So we are looking at promoting accountability at many levels, and this should not just be left between parliamentarians and the executive. We know the weaknesses that are embedded in there. After all, as much as 70% of members of the executive are
from Parliament.
And that is a weakness in accountability by itself. But we need to beef up this by also supporting anti-corruption institutions to do their work and do it very well. The audit service, the YOCOs, the Office of the Special Prosecutor, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but you can imagine the kind of pressure that comes, you know, these people, for instance, let's take the Auditor General and recently, and the kind of battles that he's had to fight from within as well.
Yeah.
How does it work when our independent institutions, so-called, don't seem independent in terms of the kind of struggles and hurdles that they have to cross?
Yes, I think that it is the reason why we are calling for a very vibrant citizenry, a very vibrant civil society organizations. And I think that the president himself has called upon us to be citizens and not spectators. And you will realize that given the petition by the Auditor General, civil society coalitions have issued their viewpoint on this to support a process where the independence of the Auditor General is actually maintained. But above all, I think that we have to engage on an aggressive awareness raising of both policymakers and citizens on the situation as we have it exposed in the report. And to have people organized in groups to fight for their rights. I can tell you that fisher folks, peasant farmers are the ones the politicians go to ask for vote. And they engage with them as individuals, but not as organized groups. If we begin to organize these people to appreciate the dynamics of managing the economy and how that tells on their access to services, and get them organized to demand for what is due them, we will begin to see changes.
I don't know if you heard about the Ekonfi situation where the member of parliament visited the area and the people, you know, approached him and wanted to find out why he had not delivered on the many promises, including providing jobs and fixing roads. I know that in some cases, in this particular case, you know, it almost ended up like an attack. That's not what we are asking for. But how do the people, now people know that they have a voice. But it looks like it's either you call a radio station or a television station. Where else do you channel? I mean, what's the strategy? What kind of strategy can people use?
Yeah, I earlier on told you about elite political capture. The report finds out that there's centers around political parties who extend their influence up to the local government level. And all decisions that are made are done in the interest of these few people. Other ways by which we can bring about this change is to get, as I said, organized groups, TUC, the Catholic Bishops' Conference, and other faith organizations, and Peasant Farmers Association, and so on, educated on the drivers of inequality and therefore the reasons why they are getting poorer. And for them to understand and come up with strong propositions and be ready to push for it if it means even going to the extremes of demonstrating, so that they register their protest at the current economic system that we are operating in. I believe by that, our policymakers will listen more and be more responsive to the needs of the majority of Ghanaians.
But per the figures that you put out, the way we're going, if we continue this way, how would we end up?
Yes, the figures tell us in the first place that if we do not do anything about inequality, poverty reduction is going to be at a slower pace, if not retrogress. If we do not do anything about inequality, the growth in the economy itself that we are experiencing now is not going to grow at a faster pace, because you will have fewer people contributing to the growth. People who are not educated, who have no skills, will contribute less to the growth of the economy than those who are properly trained and can earn decent, very good jobs and good wages. But the most important thing is that if we do not address inequality, it will threaten our social cohesion. We've seen it happen elsewhere in the world. People are increasingly asking questions about whether the democracy we are practicing is delivering socio-economic transformation. And once they lose trust in this, it can lead to questions about why we should maintain the democracy at all. And so we are, through this report, appealing to all well-meaning Ghanaians, those in policy and those who are not in policy, to remember that collectively we fought for a democracy. But the figures as we see it now is likely to threaten our democracy if we do not do anything about it.
Interesting. Okay, so where will this report end up? I mean, from the expose yesterday, what happens afterwards?
Oxfam sent Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition are members of what we call the SDG Civil Society Platform on Inequality. We are also working with a group called the Ghana Fight Inequality Alliance. These groups will engage directly with policymakers on issues in the report that are related to their area.
Okay.
So we are hoping that when we knock at the doors of the policymakers at the Finance Ministry, at the Education Ministry, at the Employment Ministry, we will have a hearing to engage with them and to sell the propositions that will work to improve to address the drivers of inequality as we found in the report. But besides that, we intend to widen the movement. And we are looking at working with the Students' Union, the Workers' Union, as you have in TUC, NAT, NAGRAT, and so on, to see how they join this campaign.
But I'm sure you appreciate the fact that some of these groupings that you mentioned, leadership is heavily politicized. Exactly.
We are not oblivious of the difficulties and the resistance we will meet in putting forward some of these propositions. For example, one of the recommendations made in the report is for us to revise our tax regime and do it in a manner that we can rake in more tax revenue from the rich. They are the ones who control the economy and they will resist it. But we will employ many strategies. One of it is to convince them. For example, Bill Gates is leading the campaign among people of his income level to pay the right taxes. It is possible for us to get such rich people in Ghana to understand why they should pay more taxes.
Okay.
Yeah, but so besides that, the political elite is not going to just take it. We will seek to convince them to see our viewpoint.
Okay.
But as I told you earlier, besides putting forth persuasive propositions, when it fails, we will resort to demonstrations.
All right. I'd like to say thank you to you. I mean, it's very revealing, and I hope that we've gone deeper enough to get people on board, to get to understand why we need a certain movement, so we can put pressure on those who make the decisions on our behalf. Because as we speak, a lot more poor people are getting poorer. It's not getting better. It's getting worse by the day, by the minute, and we can't just sit back and just watch things to happen that way. It affects all of us. And the figures, even in the Daily Dispatch, it's also very heartbreaking. If you look at it, the number of extreme poor persons in 2017 is 2.4 million. Number of poor is 6.8 million. That's a lot of people that we're talking about. But we thank you for your time, Mr. Zakaria Sulemana. Thanks to Oxfam Send Ghana and the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition for highlighting on this. And then we will not leave the conversation here. We will continue to talk about it as well.
Thank you very much. And we hope you will continue to support us in exposing these issues and getting the right attention from
Absolutely,
those who,
we will.
Yeah.
All right, stay with us. You're still watching the AM show. We have lots more coming your way this Thursday.